Welcome to A Photographer's Life, the channel that takes you behind the curtain into the world of professional architectural photography. Join us now for an episode with some of America's premier architectural photographers. Today's broadcast comes from a recent Zoom meeting of the Association of Independent Architectural Photographers. This discussion is led by AIAP Director Alan Blakely. We hope you enjoy the show. If you do, please let us know by liking this episode and subscribing to this channel. Now, on with the show.
Okay, I want to welcome everyone who's logged on to this second monthly meeting of the Association of Independent Architectural Photographers. The topic for today's discussion is one that's come up a number of times, and after I asked for input last time, the one topic that came up again and again was on cost sharing and licensing. And so that's where we're going to start today. And I will put some links up in the chat window if you've got that open on your Zoom situation there. And these are links to the ASMP's business practices, which relate to cost sharing. These are also shared by the American Institute of Architects, as well as ASMP. And to begin with,
could I just say a little something about those PDFs that you just mentioned?
Yes.
So I help work on those. I help write them a little bit.
Okay, Barry.
So one thing that's nice to say to clients that you're having to educate, which is always tricky because nobody likes feeling stupid, that they don't hire you. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah.
Is that those were co-written by the AIA Council when back in the good old days when everybody was getting along, the AIA would do continuing education in the ASMP booths at the national conventions. And so some of those people, those council, in-house council, were instrumental in writing that. So it was kind of written with our then council and their council, and then some other people that were not lawyers, so we could make it read so the ordinary people could understand it. But that came out of some real disagreements between architects and architectural photographers as to how the permissions licensing should go in terms of competitions and awards and things like that. And it kind of, that was a brouhaha, and then it grew into an actual collaboration. How often does that happen?
I appreciate the background on that, Barry.
Sure.
That's really important to know because for those of us who have been around a while and remember when it was the American Society of Magazine Photographers rather than media photographers, things were different then, especially in the architectural field. So,
Yeah.
So Barry, thank you for giving us that background on that information. Just in your perspective, Barry, how are things now? And where are things, as far as your business is concerned, with this particular topic of cost and license sharing?
I always find that unless it's a really experienced architect, and even then sometimes, they have to be explained, it has to be explained to them how this works. And what I've realized is I sort of have to repeat myself to really focus in on the advantages of cost for them, that cost goes down. That is the only thing that seems to get people's attention. You could talk about fairness, and you can talk about the photographers trying to protect their copyright and also trying to protect, to some degree, how the architects are viewed, and having their images stolen and blah, blah, blah. You can go on and on about that stuff.
Yeah.
But talking about saving money, that gets their attention. And I find that's when, oh, well, hey, maybe the landscape architect, maybe the window vendor, somebody else will be interested in it. Other than that, it seems like the same old.
Okay. I think you bring up an interesting point there. I know if I bring this topic up and I say anything with regard to licensing and copyright, that the barriers go up immediately. But if I started out, like you said, with cost being the topic of discussion, then it's an easy topic and it's an easy road to go down with the architects or whoever is the original person commissioning the photography. I'd be interested to know how each of you are handling this and what you found to be the most effective way to do this at the outset. Where do you start with this? Is it right when you get the assignment? Is it when you make a bid or an estimate, or where do you start? Be interested to hear from you.
Yeah, I can start.
Okay.
I see Michael Yearout's on here. Michael, I might have borrowed your scaled pricing structure for multiple users, multiple licenses. Maybe my memory is incorrect on that, but it's been for a while that I've had it.
You can have it. Okay.
All right. I dig that background too.
Thanks.
No, basically, I approach it. I try to approach it right from the outset. But what's interesting is when the architect in the RFQ comes in and says, these people will be involved. Obviously, they're educated and they know that they can cut their costs at the front end of it by spreading this out. And I do the scale thing where, if we have 2 users, it's a little less. If we have 3, it's a little less. But the problem I run into is that a lot of times it's not going to be the basic feature package that the architect is looking for that's going to interest the electrical engineer. We all know that story. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got their own interest in what they want to see. And so it's not just simply a matter for me of dividing it down, because I'm actually going to be doing a lot more work for each of those contractors. The architect doesn't care about the mechanicals a lot of times as far as photographs go, right? Maybe some of yours do, but I've run into that where an interesting quick story is that a very prominent architect here in town had reached out with an RFQ for a nice office project, a college project actually. And when he had 5 different end users on this. And, I'll just throw the money out there as I recall it. I was somewhere in the 4,200 region for everything. This is 5 different end users, completely unrelated. A huge project. So when the architect got back to me, he said, we went with someone else. You were high. If you want to discuss it, give me a call. And I was like, okay. And this is a prominent architectural firm here in town. And I called him up and he said, yeah, the next one under you is from blah, blah, blah. I won't mention the name, but it's an architectural photographer who has been prominent in this area for 20 years before I even hit the scene here in 90. So he's got a long-standing reputation and great work. And he came in at somewhere around the 3,000, 3,200 mark. But then the architect said, but we didn't give it to him either. We gave it to another guy who happens to be a member of our group, but not on this call. Who came in at,
let me know if he gets on.
Hang on. No, we're good. Came in from out of town and did it all in for 1,800 with 5 users.
Oh, yikes.
And when the architect told me this, even he was laughing. He said, I'd be an idiot not to roll the dice on this. I said, okay, what can you do? What can you do? The guy says, at that rate, I can afford to go ahead and hire, the next guy up the line.
That's discouraging. I think
well, it is, and I don't mean to lead with that.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's, we all know that's the issue that we run up against is somebody will always undercut. But
one of the things that I do right as I'm having this discussion, particularly with people that are not familiar with it, is not only do I say you can save money, but that the landscape architect or the electrical engineer, they're going to have different needs. So I'm going to write a separate contract for everybody. I will manage it. So I want to, by the way, this is also a way to take that off the table right away. I don't want one person managing my money. And I say, look, because everybody wants different things, they're going to get different numbers of photos, but believe me, everybody's price is going to drop like a stone. and I say, I'm going to make a lot more money and I'm going to do a lot more work. But I'm also going to generate a lot more photos, and some that you may want that you don't anticipate wanting now, which has been the case almost every time. And so it's basic sales technique. There's nothing magic about it. I just try to, what are all those objections I've heard over the years or heard from other photographers over the years? And I just lay them out up front. And that also, I think, I like to think anyway, I'm not a calm person, but I think it calms people down a little bit, that they say, oh, well, he's thought about this. He's done it before. He's made it work and all that. I mean, having said that, having somebody come in at a third or half of what you're bidding is, if cost is the deal for them, cost is the deal, then they're not interested in quality or choice of photos.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That we're not selling cost at this point in our careers. We're selling the quality of the imagery, and we're not going to be able to compete on that. I run into situations here in my local market in Utah where there are photographers who will shoot a project on spec with the hope that they can then license it to the different entities. And I've had them show up when I've been already hired for a job. I've had them show up on the job, shooting it behind me, hoping that they can do some licensing behind. So, there's an aggravating factor there that's really hard to put into words for me anyway.
Well, there's one place where that works. There's one, Ewan Bond. Do you know about him? He's very famous. It's IWAAN. No, IWANBAAN. He is a Dutch. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so he's a Dutch photographer. He went to Rem Koolhaas, but he's a weirdo. He's not like other photographers. He's been at the Venice Biennial. He's done all kinds of things the rest of us don't do, but that's how he got started. I think he gets assignments now. But because he had Rem Koolhaas, who was a fellow, maybe a friend even, say, yeah, let him in. He can go anywhere and do anything, to one of the most famous architects in the world. And, he self-financed it. But then he would license the shit out of this stuff globally. So that's a different thing than what I do, which is I'm shooting for a local architect in Northern California. I mean, nobody's going to be buying those photos in Estonia. Right? So.
Exactly.
Iwan Bond is also first to site on a lot of projects. I'm in New York, and there's building going on all the time, but he'll damn it, he beat me again. He'll sweep in, and he's hired, of course, but he also visits sites. Like there's oftentimes there's still construction equipment, cones, tape, things like that, but he'll get the pictures and get them licensed. And what that does is close the door for other sales, I think, on the project. Once the press has gotten a hold of it, they've gotten a hold of it, or once certain clients have spent their sort of photo budget on it, they've spent their photo budget. So if I roll in later, and because I've been hired twice to photograph projects where the exterior lighting wasn't in place on a project that he'd already photographed. So I say, oh, look, I've got these great photos with the exterior lighting is in place, and the project is all, there's actually landscaping, whereas in his photos, there's no landscape. It doesn't matter because the budget is already spent. Just a little nugget of information I thought I could share is that it's interesting. If you have something that's valuable, it declines in value if someone else has already sold it, of course.
Yeah, I was getting back to the original question. If it's a new client or a new inquiry, I always, as part of the kind of interview process, if it's by phone, I try and determine if they have other parties that might be interested, and this allows a lower cost overall, and I make more money in the process. But I try and get past that so that it isn't a pricing game, because if you dwell too much on the cost, then your prospective client becomes obsessed with that. There's certainly always situations where, the decision, if they get 3 bids, the decision is going to go to the least expensive photographer. But by doing the multi-party agreement and the cost share, you can get your price down So it's competitive with somebody who's only thinking in terms of that one architect as the client, and there's no other partners in the project. And a lot of times the smaller firms aren't even aware of the possibilities.
I think that's true. I think there are a lot of markets where the level of professionalism isn't to a point where these architects have even heard about this kind of a situation, or contractors, or whoever your primary client may be. I know for me personally, I always, if I get a bid request, I will give them my creative fee, and then I will also give them a breakdown based on numbers of parties so that they see that up front, because they're not always comfortable divulging all the different parties that may be involved in this. Once they see what the advantage is to doing that, however, and to Barry's point about managing this yourself, I don't ever get in a situation where I bill my primary client and expect them to collect from all the other contractors. It's an individual license for each of those entities, and they're invoiced individually, and I take care of that. So once they tell me who they are, then the contact from there on out is mine personally with that client who's sharing in that cost.
I come across situations where the architect does not want to share. They do not want other people to have their imagery. And I've had that happen. And suddenly, I mean, I can really negotiate like crazy when I've got other people that I can sell licensing to. But I do come across people who just want to make it a money game. And I seem to lose out on that one all the time because I can't lower my cost enough to compete. Then it just becomes a dollar thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Phil, a quick question.
Anybody else have that situation?
I do as well. And I wanted to ask you now, if they want an exclusive, are they still not willing to pay what your minimum is? If they don't want anyone else to have use of the images, they want an exclusive, basically.
I have yet to really be able to win one of those situations. I can win just about every time by saying, hey, let's get the electrician involved. Let's get the people who do the HVAC work involved. And I tell them, look, it's gonna create more work for me because I have to shoot then the utility room, for example, for the electrician or whatever, which the architect doesn't really want. And so, I tell them it creates more work for me, but then also it does definitely create more sales for me through the licensing aspect. I've had some people say, well, look, let me take a look at the images and then I'll decide. And I'm back to them saying, look, that's like playing cards. You want to see my poker hand here? While you're bidding? No, we can't do that way. I mean, either you come in up front or you come in later, and when you come in later, it's probably going to cost you more because my licensing fees after the fact then go up. It's a tough situation for me when I come across those people. And there's a couple architects actually in Milwaukee that I've run across this problem with that they just don't want to share. I think in some ways they've got an issue going on with some of the contractors where they feel the contractors are trying to get in front of them on projects. And they're afraid the contractor that is going to use greater imagery or the same imagery to convince the client, the ultimate client, that they should be controlling the whole situation rather than the architect controlling things. I mean, we've seen this, the whole marketing situation is just really changing a lot.
The one perspective quickly is that often the architect or the builder of the client doesn't want me to spend any more time on a shoot doing somebody else's images that they can't use. That's why they object to having it shared. It's kind of like, hey, I wouldn't mind after the fact, but I want to make sure you're covering all my stuff in the time that we have on site, rather than you're splitting your efforts and your time and shooting for, other third parties that, he wants to foot the bill and not own the images, but control them to the extent of having as much stuff shot as he can.
In the two cases I've run up against, they've just point blank told me, we don't want to share. We don't want our images being used by somebody else.
To that point, I just had an experience with an architect who I really like. He hired a woman, a person who does marketing. And I think this is often the case with marketing people, that they have some ideas that maybe don't, that I'm not appreciative of. And so in this case, what it was a multi-party shoot. It was a big vineyard estate. I live in Napa, so this was in Sonoma. Very pretty property, you know, with its own vineyard and a couple of barns, just the typical everyday kind of way people live around here. And so I worked for the contractor, the architect, and the landscape architect. And the landscape architect had a drone. I don't have a drone. Forgive me, I'm gonna figure that out later. So he said, I don't know how to photograph with this thing. I said, you run it, I'll tell you what to do. And we got some spectacular shots. One of the photos that we got was a photo of this area that showed two of the barns. It was gorgeous, late afternoon light. It's a really beautiful photo. It's on my website, but it doesn't show the architect's work. It doesn't show the landscape architect's work, and it doesn't really show the contractor's work, right? All three of them wanted this photo. And so that was fine, you know, because I put up a bunch of galleries. I said, pick the ones you want. The architect takes this photo and makes it his homepage, his entire homepage. It's not a slideshow. And he says, this is my branding. He said, I'm aware that none of my work is in this photo. I said, I don't care. He said, what would it take to license this exclusively? And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, we don't want anybody else to use it because, you know, this is part of our branding. And I said, well, and then I had to explain to him, one, I didn't take the photo. So then I had to get into copyright law. And I said, technically, you know, the photo is owned by your landscape architect, right? Mm-hmm. And our agreement was that I would process it and he would use it. And I said, and also the contractor is using this photo and I'm using this photo. And I said, so, you know, I had to then gently say, so I said, look, you're in a small market. I don't think this really matters. I don't think anybody's going to notice that the landscape architect who's not in your business has this photo, or the contractor has it. None of us have it on our homepage. It's all buried in, you know, a gallery. But I had to have 2 or 3 conversations about this before they stopped going on about it. And I suspect I will never get hired by that architect again because his marketing person didn't want to hear about this, because I think his marketing person was a bit of an amateur. Because people get ideas about branding. They read all the blogs and all the things that we read. So they think this really means something. And I don't know what to do about that other than to just do what I just did, which is try to explain to them in a nice way. It's not a big issue. But that was a little bit like what you're talking about.
And that was all after the fact?
Oh, this was months after the fact. This is a year after the fact.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, and also they were building, the architect had a brand new website and the landscape architect was using the same developer. So the websites even look the same.
I want to get back to a point about the before the fact and the after the fact situation that we run into. And I know that from a philosophical standpoint that we all want to be able to license this before the fact and get everybody on board and have a signed contract in hand. For me, that doesn't always necessarily happen. And I'm not able to vet all the different people that are involved in the project ahead of time. And so I have begun in the situations where I think that there's a potential for me to license this to a number of different parties after the fact. I will hold off on billing on the primary invoice or estimate that I've given and post a preview link that the preview of those images goes out to all the different people that I've been able to identify in the interim who may have an interest in this. What that's done for me then is allow me to license within a week or so of the project to a lot of different entities They see the previews. I give them that price. I tell them what the cherry picking price is, the per image price, but then I also offer that cost sharing price. And in at least 90% of the cases, I have all of those people licensed at that point, where they weren't willing to commit beforehand. Now, Phil, you brought up the fact that, you know, some of them just, they don't want to buy it right away because they haven't seen your work or they don't know your work. And a lot of us, we work with clients who we never meet and have never done business with us. And certainly they're, you know, the subcontractors never have as well. So for me anyway, this has been a way to kind of bridge that gap where I can't get them on board, you know, the week before the shoot, but the week after the shoot, I can. And so I just wanted to bring that up, that's, you know, it's kind of another possibility for revenue that I don't have to walk away from because I wasn't able to get it on the front end.
Your primary client a discount at that point?
I do. I give them the discount that would have been in place for the license sharing had they done it up front. But I give them a week. I don't let this be something that they can come back, you know, a year from now and the contractor wants to license them. At that point, it's up to my my per image licensing price that is just the same. It's the same for everyone for every image, and they only get that break in that 1 week. And the website comes down. The preview website comes down after 7 days, and the images are gone forever at that price. Wow. So that's just another alternative that I've been using successfully the past couple of years. Anybody
Alan,
else want to share their experience?
I have a quick question, Alan. Do you split the expenses equally and then add a percentage to it? And if you do, rather than just split it equally amongst the parties, how are you rationalizing that if the client questions, you know, hey, how come it's 3 parties, 1/3 expenses, but then there's an added percentage to that?
I don't personally break out my expenses from my creative fee. I show a creative fee and I don't itemize anything beyond there. So my creative fee is going to cover, you know, what my photography fee is, assistants, stylists, equipment rental, travel. I've got that all in there because for me personally, I found that if I show the client one price, that's a whole lot easier than having to show them 10 prices for different little add-ons and things like that they don't really want to know about. I mean, to me, it's like going to the car dealer. I don't want to know about every part that you had to put in the car. I just want it fixed and tell me how much it is. And so this is the way that I've approached it is my creative fee is the all-in fee. And then I will show what the breakdown is for cost sharing of that particular fee beyond that. So they don't see any kind of, here's a creative fee or licensing plus a percentage of expenses on that. So it's a lot easier math wise. And for me, it's just a whole lot easier to sell the client on at that point. If I don't make how much is it going to cost me too complicated?
Right. But does it change from your quote because you've shot either additional pictures or you're delivering fewer photographs than you originally anticipated?
Unless I have a shot list from these people who may be the additional licensees up front, what they're getting is the shot list that I did for the primary client. So I did a situation where I shot a large estate home recently. The architect was the one who hired me. I didn't have anybody else on board going into the shoot. And then after I did the shoot, then I had the interior designer and the contractor on board. And so I didn't shoot anything additional for them. So, but what they did is license what the existing photographs were. If I'm able to get everybody on board ahead of time, then I like to see a shot list from everybody. Then I can maybe put together a composite shot list and cover all the bases. And like we mentioned before, the architects are not going to care about the mechanical or the landscaping or details or interior design details or things like that. And I may spend 25 to 50% longer on the shoot in order to cover all those bases but my creative fee is going to affect that. Is going to reflect that, I should say, and the cost sharing is also going to reflect that. So, two ways to approach that. But I don't shoot things on spec, hoping that perhaps the landscape architect or whoever later will take care of that. Anybody else?
Yeah, Alan, when you're pricing on the second and third client coming in after you do a shoot, how are you structuring your licensing fee on those images? Are you having them select only the images they want and then you're pricing them per image, or how do you go about doing that?
No, I price that based on them buying the entire portfolio. I don't let them cherry pick things like that. I know there's a lot that do that, but I personally just let them, the licensing that I do at that point is just for the entire portfolio. And so they get a killer deal on it. I don't let it get more complicated than that.
I live in a particularly high tourist area, and we have a lot of attractions and hotels that I do work for. One of the things I've done is built up an inventory of the local attractions. We have about 8.5 million people that come here a year and visit the city. So I've built up an inventory of those things that, for example, hotels might want to highlight as features of the city. And so from time to time, I get several requests for licensing particular images. Yeah. Does anybody else live in an area where they have a particularly high amount of tourist traffic? And if so, are you doing the same thing? And what kind of pricing structure? Because I've researched a lot about pricing and licensing and what you should charge. And I know it varies by market, but it's a constant battle on what to charge someone for a license. And I know it depends on how extensively they're going to use it. And my agreement limits what they can do with it based upon the price they pay. But is there any feedback from anybody else on that kind of one-off? Let's say they want 10 images. What kind of structures you're looking at pricing something like that?
I charge $300 for the initial image if they're just licensing one, and then it goes down if they go 2, 3, 4, 5 plus. Then the pricing is reduced, but then they have to license, for example, 5 images at the same time. It's going to be $200 per image, so that's $1,000. If they want to go 6 to 10, it's still $200. That's the bottom for me. If they don't want to pay that for architectural or interior photographs, I really don't entertain that, because my feeling is that it's generally an exclusive, and in most cases where this has come up, they really don't have the opportunity to get in there to have it photographed. So it's either me or no one, unless they want to, use an iPhone shot or something. So it's a little bit.
But is that based on what kind of usage are you granting with that fee? Is it unlimited? Is it limited to a certain amount?
It's not time limited. Yeah, it's not time limited, but it depends on what they're going to do with it. For most of the people interested in this, they want to use it for their website and for social media. Realistically, not a lot of folks advertise. And, in terms of architects, I have a builder that advertises every month. They use my pictures. There's other, audio people and stuff that are always putting, full page ads in these shelter magazines. But for the most part, an architect might advertise in a trade journal or an AIA or something like that, but there isn't a lot of that. So I feel comfortable having kind of a flat rate. They know what to expect.
Excuse me, I've got a question about your creative fee. Does it vary depending on the complexity and distance you have to travel and so forth?
Absolutely. You're speaking to me, Dale?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I personally will itemize everything in order to come up with that number. And so I'm going to be figuring out, just as if I was going to send them an itemized quotation, I'll be figuring it out for myself. And I'm going to cushion that a little bit as well. And then that ends up being my creative fee. Okay. So I'm going to mark up, if I have to hire a videographer to come in on the shoot, then that gets marked up as well, and all those other kinds of things. Travel expenses I mark up. But for me personally, I found that showing them just a number is a whole lot easier to get things rolling.
Okay, I have always itemized coming from a architect's background because our clients always demanded it, but maybe I'll switch over and try what you do and see if that's easier.
You might do that. I haven't had anyone say, I'd like to see what all those individual expenses are. I've never had that happen. But when I did itemize, say 15 years ago or 20 years ago, then I would have people quibble about, well, how come you're charging me this much per diem? And how come your assistant costs this much? And I don't want to talk about that. So.
What I've done, I've created on my residential side, I've created formatted packages with certain images.
Okay.
And so that makes it real simple on the residential side. On the commercial deals, it's a little bit different, but and then I just itemize it. Here's a package, 40 images at X, and then drone is with a package is this, without a package is that, and that's it. And they love it. It's real simple, and it's, yes, I'm going to get 40 images, I'm going to get 50 images, and they don't have to wonder about how many they're getting or what's included in the package and everything. So it works real simple for me. I mean, it just keeps it, and they never question it. They go, oh, what if I want to get more or less? And it's all pre-printed, and they get it.
That brings up a question that I'd like to kind of pose to the group at large here is, do you ever work on do you ever run any problems with numbers of images, people asking how many images will I get, or I thought I would get more images, or anything like that? I can just tell you personally, I don't ever promise a number. That hasn't worked for me. And so I tell them I will cover their property or their project adequately. Is there kind of a division, but in the group here about numbers of images versus not?
On the commercial side, there's usually not.
Okay.
When I'm doing, like I just did a new, for an architect, I did a new gas station that was here, a big, 40 pump gas station. And he just said, I need so many images, like he specified. But normally on the commercial, I don't. Residential, like I said, it's always about how many images, because the people that want them have limitations on how much they can upload. So, they don't need 70 images. They only can do 40.
Okay.
So that's why the pre-packaging works for me. But on commercial, I never talk images amount. Okay. It just doesn't come up.
All right.
I get that question up front a lot of the time, where and usually it's an underling in a company, whether they're a developer or a property management company, and the person will say, we want you to shoot this, and we'd like to have 20 to 25 images so we can choose 5 or 6 from them. And I try to talk them off the ledge at that point and say, do you really want me shooting that many images at the time it takes me to do that? So, I'm trying to find the medium ground on that, because if they just come out and say, we'd like you to shoot 25 to 30 images, well, that's this amount.
We got I wanted to get back to June, and then Monica after June. You had questions and we didn't get to you yet. So June and then Monica, please.
Okay. So I have a few questions, 2 of them. As far as say for instance, you photograph a half a day, and then after a while, after that, you license the images a certain price. Is that the same price no matter if it's a small project or a big project? Or like a bigger project, you probably charge more for third-party licensing than a small project. So that's one question. And the other question was, is there like a formula you use to, say for instance, when you license it throughout, or you license it for 2 years usage for magazines? Is there something I could follow? Would like to get a blueprint.
He wants the magic wand.
No. I do.
Yeah,
I hear you.
I think for myself, the price is the price. The size of the project. Are you asking? Is it a large office building, or is it a small cottage on a lake? I mean,
yeah,
it's more about who the client, who wants it, what they're going to do with it. Because I think the imaging, the license value is based on how much value they're going to get out of it. If it's a big architectural firm, they can afford more. They're also going to get more bang for their dollar because they're going to use it for larger projects. It's going to go far wider and farther. If it's a solo architect, they're probably not going to be able to afford advertising. They're not, their reach is not that great. So they're going to pay less for the project up front. And I probably will give them a discount on the image license as well, especially if it's a package, but I start off, if it's after the fact, they're considered stock images from my perspective, and it's individually. And but I always try and get them to go for a group of images. And for that, I discount, the total package.
I'm in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, and we have such a great group of architecture and design professionals here. It's really rare that I run into, my primary work is commercial interiors and architecture, but I'm usually working for the big firms. And they all seem quite educated on how creative fees and licensing and expenditures work. So I don't really run into that very often, thank goodness. I don't know if any of you all are pre-scouting projects, but typically for me, because I'm working with an interior design firm or architects, we'll go out and we'll look at the project ahead of time, and I'll take some cell phone shots. And then I'll submit those cell phone shots, just rough ones, and they can go through with their team and pin them on a board and pick the shots that they want. So by the time we actually get to the shoot, I know how many shots they want, exactly which ones, how long it's going to take me, and then I provide them with an estimate. It's really just a few line items. Like Alan, I'll provide a creative fee, and that's based on time, obviously, but it's all inclusive with editing, any post-production stuff. And, I even have some clients that I won't mention them, but they want to be able to use the images anyway, anytime that they want to. So sometimes I will give them literally one line item and say, here's for a full day shoot based on the shots that we're looking at, or approximately this many shots. And I literally just give them one number. And if I have any expenses, like overnight expenses, hotel, travel, I'll add another line item underneath of that for travel. So, I think around this area, architects, engineers, developers, designers, it's about their relationships. And the one thing that I've had to learn is to be flexible when it comes to licensing. So if you know ahead of time what shots you're going to get, and you can provide scouting shots, they will then also share those with maybe the commercial furniture dealership, or the lighting company, or the carpet manufacturer, or the wall covering company who did the murals. So, with interiors, there's a lot of other groups that are involved other than, the engineering or the landscaping groups. So, more times than not, we'll be able to pinpoint who's participating, what the overall cost is going to be, and how to break that down before we ever even go out onto a shoot. And it works pretty well. Also too, if we come up with a creative fee and I quote them, this many parties for licensing, they're all getting the same price for licensing per image, no matter what. I don't discount that. And if someone comes in after the fact, there is a premium for that, but I always ask permission from whoever commissioned me to do the work to make sure that I can sell those images to that group. Also, I will let people sometimes cherry pick what they want. I'm going to get that creative fee no matter what, and that's all inclusive of what my time is going to be. So if I have, yes, the engineers are in and they're going to do the full package. Maybe, the mural company comes in and they only want one or two. I will definitely give them one or two images licensing, because in the end, I've always, I think, gotten more clients and more business and made more money down the road. The commercial furniture company will come to me and go, hey, the architect selected those shots, but we're not getting furniture specific shots. Will you shoot these other 3 projects for us because we know you'll focus on furniture? So I think, I think being flexible and realizing that, they're trying to be flexible with their clients and with their relationships with other vendors has really helped me in the end. So I don't know if that helps any of y'all, but thanks for letting me share.
I got a question for you, Monica.
Okay.
Yeah, especially with the whole scouting, do you charge a percentage of, or fixed scouting fee, or do you just package that later?
It's in the creative fee.
It is already, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
What if you don't end up getting the project? Has that happened? You scout the project and it doesn't go forward for whatever reason?
I don't scout it if I'm not going to get it.
I've had situations where an ongoing client will ask me to scout something. I scout it, I show them the gallery, and then at some point in the future, the project gets killed for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's still my ongoing client. You just eat it in my case.
Sometimes the projects just get killed. I mean,
right.
not because I lost it or didn't get to, or was priced out of range. I mean, sometimes, the intent is there that we're going to shoot this big 2-day project, with models and whatnot. And then their client decides they don't want to do it, or a global pandemic hits, or the stock market cracks, or, there's so many things out of your control. And sometimes you do have to do that, but it's worth it to me in the long run to do it.
I have to say, I've done scouting before I got the contract when I was pretty sure I was going to get it. Mm-hmm. And I had one house that was by a pretty well-known architect in Los Angeles when I was living there. And those scouting shots years later got licensed by that architect, and then ended up in a book and got licensed by a magazine. They were just, some of them were handheld, and but they just looked good. The light was nice. Sometimes you just get lucky. This is, I'm going to admit, this is an extreme case, but I do agree, though, on your first point that you made about scouting. If I can scout, it's always better. Also, because then you can begin to pin down what they really want. And I think it makes them feel better, even if I never take a single shot,
When I send a scouting shot, it is never going to be the size or quality that will ever be printed or shared. Or, I send it in like a super low res PDF with or sometimes through Dropbox in a PDF where they can comment in Dropbox right next to the images. Yeah. So like their team can literally keep those comments in Dropbox, and then those photos go away. They never make it past them. Also, too, just from experience, being able to quote somebody, I can say in a half-a-day shoot based on a commercial project, I can provide you with approximately this range of photos based on a half a day, or approximately this many images based on a full day. So you can kind of give them an approximate price of how long it's going to take you to possibly yield this many photos, and then fine tune that once you get going.
Yeah, that sounds good. That's
that scouting thing is. I have a very similar working model to Monica.
Okay.
Where we I try to scout everything, and that's how we kind of get around getting nailed down on the number of shots, because then the commissioning party is walking through, and we've got all the plan views that they want to have, and a lot of times they're actually thinking in terms of, oh well, the interior designer is going to want this thing, and the countertop people are going to want these shots, and so we try to make accommodations for that stuff. But like similarly, like half a day, or if it's usually longer than half a day for sure. But I know pretty accurately how many shots I can do. Unless there's a stylist involved, then things kind of slow down a little bit. Or if there's magazine people on board and stuff like that, obviously it's going to take a little bit. I can't get quite as much done, but it's a similar thing. And so you make people feel a little bit better about, okay, this is about how many shots we're going to get. But I always do the caveat of you've got to prioritize that shot list too, because sometimes we spend like 3 hours walking around the thing and there's like 58 shots, and it's like, we're not going to do that in a day, guys. So let's be realistic. What do you really have to do? What's the story that you're trying to tell about the project? It's a pitch, shoot for a magazine, or it's for the portfolio or something. And then I know how to price it in general. And if it's a multi-party thing, that's when we're talking about that right at the get-go. And I've already been hired at this point, so there's no fear that I'm going to scout it and do all the work and on the prep work and not get it. But it's also a similar thing that Monica said, where getting all the people. Well, I lost my train of thought, but that's basically how I do it. And then afterwards, on the everyone needs to be on board mostly in the way I kind of do it, to multi-party situation. And then, you have to be pretty flexible, but then after a certain time, and if people are not on board, then I do go to the cherry picking rate, I guess we refer to it. And that's expensive, and I try to base that on, I try to get $450 an image for that. And then if they want a certain number, then they can pay $2,500 and get the whole shoot. Because in our market, which is quite small and very, very competitive, there's just no way to get more than that. And in some places, in some cases, some clients, you have to kind of ratchet that down a little bit based on, what other people have said. Like if it's a big firm, or that they're going to do a lot of marketing, they have an in-house marketing team or something like that, then they're going to understand paying more than the solo architect who just wants Instagram photos or something, So, but I always include the whole license with the photo. I try not to peel out, just social media use, or, we want to have it on our sell sheets or something. I try not to do that, because inevitably, there's going to be turnover in the firm, and somebody's going to find the photo and use it for a print ad that was never licensed for that way. And it just, I'd rather deal with that up front and just have it all in one package together at the same time.
Thanks, Darren. I think you bring up an interesting point, that I think architectural clients are a little bit different than say an advertising client. If an agency comes to you and commissions you to do something, and it's licensed for a year, say, this particular image. I've got some clients where I shoot architectural subjects, and it's through an ad agency, and the licensing is has very set parameters. But that's not typical of architecture for me, and where I may offer an unlimited license, which is non-transferable. I mean, that's the caveat. It's not a transferable license, but they can use it in whatever media they choose to, and there's no expiration on it. Anybody else want to speak to that point? I think that's.
I do list various kinds of usage. It's a little vague because things are different. But let me first preface this by saying, I think that particularly for photographers who are not experienced architectural photographers, they think of as licensing operates in the same way that it does for commercial advertising. And I don't think it does. No. My prior career, before I became an architectural photographer, I was a contractor and I was a carpenter. So I was in that world. And I knew that my clients, my design clients, were going to need the images forever. So that's a real difference right at the start. So I don't put in, there's no time limit on usage. And I'm very explicit. I say website, social media, which is something I've added in the last few years because, duh. And contest and competitions, awards, all that stuff is in there. And I might say, physical prints in case they want to make a print. I don't want them to worry about that. Then, depending on who the client is, I might or might not put in advertising. If it's a one-person firm, I put in advertising because they're not going to be buying a full-page ad in Architectural Digest.
Right.
But if they're a big firm or something like that, that might be a kind of a different thing. But I just kind of recognize what they do, and I sometimes will talk about the licensing.
I think that's a really good point about the difference between an architecture or design firm or an interior design firm or any of the surrounding trades. That is a totally different set of usages than an advertising agency usage, and definitely requires a different kind of set of parameters that are highly prescribed. But I found that I can get more value out of photos if I just say the license is for 5 years, and if you want it for longer, then you've got to pay more for that. And some people do want an unlimited license, and so I have a multiplier factor on that. But also in the state of Maine, that's the trigger for having to charge sales tax. On sales tax on licensed intellectual property is not taxable. So until the kind of soft limitation on that is beyond 10 years. So if it's 10 years or more, it's considered a tangible sale, and at that point, no longer intellectual property. Then we have to charge sales tax. So it's a little bit of a strange gray area in that, but that's another factor of why I choose to contain the license term to create value, and also to get people educated on how sales tax is supposed to work.
Yeah, in California, it's the same. If we don't deliver a physical object, there's no sales tax. But I did want to say one last thing, which is I have both on the front page and on the terms and conditions, no third-party licensing.
Right.
So, that's in there, and it's pretty easy to see. It's right below the price, because I don't want them to think that they can let somebody else use these images without my permission. So it's just a very, it's one sentence: no third-party licensing without permission of photographer. And that's not strictly speaking part of the license, but I think of it as part of the license. And it's also a way to indicate to them, no, I'm in control of these images. You don't own them. That kind of, because copyright, having to explain copyright to clients can be very awkward. So I try to avoid it if at all costs, right?
Monica, yeah.
I don't limit usage. A lot of times they'll end up in magazines, even with like a manufacturer, they'll do an ad. But I always ask for photo credit, because the photo credit is worth more to me than, like, I can't keep track of how everybody's using these and where they're going. There's just too much to keep track of. And so but definitely, Barry, like you say, there is a firm line item about you can't sell, transfer, gift. You can't do anything with these images other than use them for your own business. But if they end up in a magazine, I want photo credit because I'll get more business out of that. But you just can't keep track of how everybody's doing it, I don't think.
I also put that they have to give me photo credit for social media, because that's such a big deal now. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One other part, Monica, that I add in the license is that if editorial fees, if they are paid, go to the photographer rather than to the building or owner or the business owner, because there have been occasions where there's been a question, that the magazine is paying for the publication rights to the photographs, and then the person that has provided the photographs, which is the client, wants to keep the fee, which I feel is unfair.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
And very often now I'm finding that the magazines they're not paying the photographer for photographs at all. They'll pay a writer to write it. They'll pay somebody to print the magazine, but they won't pay for the pictures, which I think is grossly unfair. However, I've realized that in a lot of cases, these magazines that are kind of more like vanity things, you'll get a much bigger coverage, like 14-page article with great reproduction and everything. And the value of that to me is far greater, and it's on a regular basis. In this instance, it's worth far more than the $600 or $1,400 that their competitors will pay, but we'll only give you a couple of pages and some, small placement.
Carl, my work's not ending up in a 10-page spread, I promise you. So it's I wish it would, but it's just,
I bet it could.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great information, though. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I do the same thing where in the licensing, it's always that for magazine features and articles that the client has to circle or direct the magazine to me for proper licensing and permissions. And whether that includes a payment, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. That's fine. But I always say up front that that's got to go through me, because that's what's proper.
I want to bring a point. One point with regard to that is that a lot of times the magazine will have received a low-res JPEG from my client for some reason. And so the magazine then contacts me, and that opens the door for me to say, is there an editorial fee attached to this? And this is where you need to send it. So I think that's good, because that, you know, they're calling me because they need the TIFF file.
If I could bring up one last thing, and that was what Monica, something we kind of glossed over very quickly, Monica brought up, and that is that all these people, all these auxiliary people that we license our images to, they all really become potential clients in the future. And I can't tell you how many great connections I've made from clientele who I would have never been able to touch if they hadn't been in on XYZ project. And then now suddenly they're asking me to go do something for them. It's a great source of new clients, period. Okay.
Networking just pays such great dividends over the years. I appreciate you bringing that up. That's very important. Thank you to everyone who's joined us here on this meeting today. Before we leave, I'd like to refer you back to the channel, A Photographer's Life, where this will appear on YouTube and other podcast channels. There's an interview I did with Brian Dressler, who's out of South Carolina. And Brian actually breaks down his cost and license sharing formula in that it's really easy to use. He talks at length about how he does that and why, and he has some really good insight. Brian's been shooting for 42 years, and he's seen this business, you know, transition through a lot of different phases. But I think it would be really educational if you had the time to listen to what Brian has to say on that. Again, thank you to everyone, and thank you for your support of AIAP. It's been a pleasure seeing you and talking with you, and I really appreciate the knowledge that you've been so willing to share. Again, everyone, have a great day. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.